All right, if I can have your attention, please. I'm still amazed that we somehow can't seem to all get in our seats by 10:40. Anyways, welcome again to the third lecture in this lecture series. Today's guest speaker, Mr. Robert Moritz, is the chairman and senior partner of the U.S. firm of PricewaterhouseCoopers. After having been reelected by the U.S. partnership this year in January to serve for another 4-year term, he is also a member of the PwC Global Network Leadership Team, which includes the senior partners from the network's 4 largest territories. Mr. Moritz joined the firm in 1985 and became a partner in 1995. From 1998 to 2001, he served as the Metro Region Financial Services Leader. From 2001 to 2004, he led the Financial Services Audit and Business Advisory practice, which included the banking, capital markets, insurance, investment management, and real estate sectors. From 2004 to 2006, he was a managing partner of the New York office in the Metro region. He then served as the assurance leader of the U.S. firm from 2006 to 2009 when he became the chairman. Bob has served overseas in 3 tours in PwC Tokyo, 3-year tour in PwC Tokyo, providing audit and advisory services to numerous European and U.S.-based financial service organizations operating in Japan. He is a graduate of the State University of New York at Oswego and is a member of the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants. He's also in the New York State Society of CPAs, the New Jersey State Society of CPAs, and he's the chair of the Center for Audit Quality Governing Board and board member of the Oswego College Foundation. His other board memberships include the Atlantic Council, the Conference Board, and the Partnership for New York City. It's my honor to invite Bob Moritz to the stage. Please give him a warm welcome.
So good morning, everyone. What I realized after listening to that is I got to go change that bio. What I want to do is 4 things. I want to give you a sense of what's happening in the world and the trends that are impacting the world that we pay attention to. And it's important to put those into context in terms of what we do. Second, I want to give you a little bit of perspective, if you can, around my career path. Why do I do that? I do that because in 1985 or so, I was sitting in your shoes. And I want to make sure you have an appreciation of what's happened since then when I left my university to where I am today, so you can relate to it, number one, and ask as many questions as you possibly can. Third, want to make sure it comes back to what does that all mean for you? And then I do want to get into the 4th agenda, which we'll spend a lot of time on the questions. And just so we're very clear, I will answer anything and everything. So don't hesitate. Please take advantage of the opportunity and take advantage of the time that we'll have before getting out of here at 12 o'clock. So let me jump into sort of how we think about strategy from a PwC perspective in the world that we're living in. If you want to think about strategy and what you need to achieve, you first need to think about where's the environment that you're operating in. And from us, it's actually thinking about the external environment, which is far bigger than audit clients. Yes, audit clients are absolutely very important. The investing community, absolutely very important. It was the basis by which we started our business 150 years ago in the UK and 120 years ago in the States. But now as you think about what's happening in the world, and I'll come back to it in a second, you really have to understand the external environment, the entirety of the external environment you operate in. And you've got to think about society at large. So you have to think about investors, you have to think about corporates, you have to think about boards, you have to think about governments, you need to think about regulatory agencies, you need to think about consumers. You think about academics, you think about students. So when we think about the world that we operate in and the various stakeholders that we need to engage with, connect with, and then serve, because it's a servient mentality, it's society at large. And what I want to do is walk through then what are the megatrends that are impacting society at large that therefore we have to pay attention to. So let's jump into them for a second. So first off, what's a megatrend? A megatrend is a factual direction in terms of what's happening in the world. It's based on facts. You can't refute it. You don't know where it's going, but it's clearly happening in front of your eyes. So let's touch base on a couple of them right away. We identified 5 of them. The 5 we identified that we had focused on is A, changing economic power, B, changing demographics. C, the concept of urbanization at a huge exponential level. C, resource scarcity. And 5, technology. Jump into them very, very quickly. If I go to this concept of shift in economic power, what you'll see up on the slide is the combination, no surprise to all of you, of what's happening in terms of the shift of economic power from a GDP perspective over the next decade or two, in terms of what the developed countries of past have done, particularly those in Europe. You see them coming down the scale rapidly. No surprise, you read the Goldman reports or anything like that, they talk about the BRIC countries. So yeah, Brazil, Russia, India, China, absolutely growing, GDP, unbelievable potential, and is moving in the direction where it'll take over the Italys, the Spains, the Canadas of the world. But what people aren't talking enough about right now as well is what is happening in Africa, what is happening in Malaysia, what is happening in Indonesia, what's happening in Turkey, where you're seeing that next generation of BRICS because of either demographics, which then drive consumer behavior, that then drive corporate behavior, increasing rapidly, so GDP growth increases there as well. What's the implication? For us, it's where we do business. For us, it's who we do business with. It's governments, corporates, individuals, and the like, and you have to think about the totality of the shifts of economic power, primarily from the west to the east. Get into the second one, demographical shifts. So when you look at the world society at large and the population growth, so either happening or not happening, what you have is sort of 3 fundamental issues happening on a worldwide basis. First thing that's on the slide, you see the percentage of population moving from the west to the east in terms of the number of people that will be sitting in Asia Pacific, going back to the Malaysias, the Indonesias, and the Chinas of the world. What's embedded in this is 2 phenomenons. One, an aging population, particularly in the Western countries. And second, an uprising of the middle class. And I'm going to define the middle class globally if anybody's got $5,000 or more from a buying power perspective. And it's that middle class, bigger defined, that's going to then drive the corporate behavior for those corporates to then serve those consumers. Jump to the next trend. It's this concept of urbanization. If you think about the amount of people that will grow in those various countries, and then think about where they will live, moving from rural areas to urban areas, the amount of people that move into cities that exist today and cities that don't exist today, you're talking about 1 billion people in the next 15 years moving from the rural areas into those cities. The implication, governments around the world are trying to build out cities. Safe cities, technology-enabled cities, green cities, and the like, to actually then be what I'll call competitive on a global basis for capital and investment. And what we're seeing is actually not a phenomenon of what country should I invest, but we're seeing is what city should I invest. And Africa is a great example of that right now, because if you talk to the CEOs of Procter & Gamble, IBM, Disney, Pfizer, whatever the case may be, when they think about Africa, it's a huge opportunity for them, but they're not thinking about the country, they're thinking about the cities that are growing in Africa because of the demographic trends I talked about and because of the concept of urbanization that comes from it. As a result, you get into the 4th megatrend, the concept of resource scarcity. If you're going to have the population growth in various countries, if you're going to actually have this concept of urbanization come through, the question is going to be you need more water, more energy, more food. Implication, the scarcity of resources become a bigger and bigger issue. The downstream implications, governments starting to act in a siloed way to protect their resources. Other countries investing in those countries to buy those resources. Bilateral relationships happening between countries to actually establish relationships so they have access at the appropriate point in time for those resources. Good example, if you looked at and tracked the number of airline flights between China and Brazil starting about 4 years ago, it was actually the Chinese that were trying to develop relationships in Brazil for the natural resources that sat there. And you can actually see thereafter the economic flows of capital and investment that went between those 2 countries. Take another side of this trend. If in fact countries are worried about protecting their resources, there's more rules and regulations about the resources. More rules and regulations to talk about the quality of those resources, the security of those resources, and then how those resources are actually used. And that's one of the phenomenons that you have today in terms of some corporations that are trying to then demonstrate to consumers they're being smart about the use of resources. And you see, in fact, some companies now going public with, I guarantee that my supply chain used renewable energies for 40% of my supply chain in creating this product. The implication to us, what assurance are we providing over that information when they actually make that statement? Because the consumer, the investor, and everybody of their stakeholders is interested in understanding whether that's factually correct or not. And last but not least, from a trend line perspective, is the concept of technology. You see this each and every day with everything that you do. But the reality is, you go back to, on the chart, 2008, when in fact smart devices all of a sudden started to beat out the PCs. Or, in fact, the number of devices per person became an unbelievable exponential number, which gave people unbelievable, unfettered access to information and data that they never had before. That information then ends up enabling them to be a bigger player, even though it may be an individual, to have a voice in society. Technology enables people to have a point of view about others. Could be governments, could be business, whatever it matters, does not. And as a result of more information, you've got more people that can have a voice in the system, and it's one of the main reasons why you have the all-time low of trust of people to business, people to government, people to media, because in fact they have a point of view that anybody can say anything at any point in time without any basis of fact based upon what they're reading on the internet. That's an interesting phenomenon, but let's take the trends all together for a second. If you were to look at Africa today, just as one small example, and the number of mobile devices in Africa, yeah, it's really hard to get in and out of Africa in terms of the various cities that are there because the logistics are not there. But the reality is, because of the smart devices that they have, they're actually forgetting the logistics and figuring out a way to do things via the internet or on a virtual basis like never before, which actually is enabling businesses to grow faster and serve the demographics and to build the cities that are going on. So all of these trends are super, super connected to one another, and all of these trends are here today. And if you were to sit in the boardrooms of any organization, they may call them something different, but the reality is they are acting on each one of them. And just to give you a couple of senses in terms of what I'm talking about, from a PwC perspective, we've got about 39,000 people in the US, we've got about 190,000 people on a worldwide basis. So if you go to the trend of changing economic power, our people in the States that worked in the asset management business, from our audit business and our tax business, end up working with the Chinese government to create an equivalent of the mutual fund industry, to create new investment products. And what then becomes interesting is they are looking for investment, and if you were to look across the States, and my CFO, who used to be the CFO of the NBA, she would tell you, when you look at the various arenas around the country, the investors were the Chinese, and the manner by which they invested in them were in fact the same vehicles we, PwC, helped the Chinese create to actually get their people to invest in, and then the government to then invest in those sports centers around the U.S. economy. So our auditing and tax people were in the middle of that conversation. Go to the concept of increased urbanization. There's a particular country right now that is trying to create a city that can deal with the demographics of people moving from the urban areas to the rural areas. They came to us and said, hey, what I need is help in thinking about the creation of that city. And we want to, over the next 10 years, create a city that is actually in the top 50 on a worldwide basis in terms of logistics and ease to get in and out, recreational facilities, in terms of attractiveness to have people live there, security, education, healthcare, and mobility, so we got to be technology enabled. They came to us to help project manage it from a strategy perspective in terms of framing it all out, came to us to project manage the details of it, came to us to think about how will I fund the creation of it through the creation of a tax code. So our tax people ended up in the middle of that conversation talking to the government about what is it the best way on a sustainable basis to create a tax code to get you the revenues to build out the infrastructure and then maintain it. They then came to us and said, give us the consulting capabilities to think about the strategy, the comparability against other cities to compete in the future over the next couple of decades, and then ultimately give us the skill sets to build out and bring engineers and technologists to think about what we need to do to actually build out everything that we've talked about. And then, believe it or not, help us from an accounting perspective in terms of how we will be better as a government reporting to the public how we are taking their money through taxation and putting it to good use and balancing our books. And can you provide me an extra layer of assurance over that information, because maybe you want to do something radical and go very public with information as if it was a corporate to the residents of that city. And we don't want to stop there. We actually want to provide them the information in terms of books and records, but also around how we manage resources. So can you provide us a level of assurance over the security of our resources as well as the use of our resources? Real life example going on today in terms of how we, PwC, take our auditing and accounting people, our tax people, and our consulting people together to serve that society at large. If you then take a look at and work backwards from what's your strategy, what's the environment you're operating in, and what's the megatrend discussion, you've got to come back to the sense of what's your purpose. Why do you exist as an organization? And you ask yourself two very basic questions. First, what does society need? Second, what's special about you as an organization that allows you to serve society? And as we've thought about our history has always been 150 years ago. The history was you provide an independent, objective point of view on a set of financial information that actually allows the capital markets to operate. And that was primarily our business for the first sort of 50 years in existence. As a result of being in that business, it then went to help us think about what assurance I need over tax information. And how can I comply with the tax codes on a worldwide basis? The combination of those two things lasted for about another 20 or so years. And then you ended up, because of being in that space and at the table, ended up then helping advise companies not only deal with the financial reporting and the taxation issues, but actually thinking about strategy through execution. So when you summarize it all together, why do you exist? You end up existing because you are there to serve society, to create value, report value, and sustain value. Now, I quickly went through some megatrends. I'm going to flip gears on you entirely and talk about what it meant to me and hopefully what it means to you. So to put this all in perspective, I want to give you a sense of sort of my career path. I've been with the firm since 1985. I went to a small state school in the University of Oswego, which is up on Lake Ontario. I had no idea what I wanted to do until I read a New York Sunday Times that said partners made $90,000 a year. And I said, that's for me, I'm there. So I actually started thinking about going in and actually went the first day into the accounting program. Graduated school, and at the time, probably for many of you right now, had an opportunity to go for those recruiting events, either as an intern or as a full-time employee. I had interned at IBM. My father worked there. Thanks, Dad. He helped me get the introduction. By the time March came around, PwC had given me a job offer. IBM hadn't yet. I was waiting. Friday before spring break, IBM calls me up and says, here's the job offer. And I said, great, I've been waiting for this. I'm going to go on spring break and now decide. I'm not sure my state of mind on spring break when I decided, but I decided to go with PwC. And just to give you some sense here in terms of how my thinking shifted, where when I started thinking about the profession and then the partner that made $90,000, which sounded fantastic, I had a choice between PwC and IBM. PwC was going to pay me $18,500. IBM was going to pay me $21,500. I went with the PwC offer. Why? Because I thought it would be better to go to PwC, get in, get my 2 years experience, and get the heck out, and then join IBM. And it would be harder to go to IBM, and if I didn't like it, to then join PwC. That's as simple as the rationale in terms of how I made my decision. So this concept of the money being really important, 4 years later, shifted. and shifted pretty dramatically. And we'll come back to that in a second. So I joined the firm in 1985. I started in New York City. I never spent a lot of time in New York City. I ended up focusing on a lot of different things. The first year I ended up working on a cable company. I worked on a law firm. I worked at a bank. I worked at a mutual fund company. I counted the votes on the MTV Music Awards. At that point in time, we were at its infancy stages. I was so disappointed because I didn't get a chance to go fill a seat. But that was my first year. And in my second year, I actually spent some time then in the financial services industry. And I worked on some of the major banks. Back then it was Chemical Bank, which was one of the predecessors to the JP Morgan that exists today. But I will tell you, I had no idea what I was doing. And if you were to look at my evaluations back then in those first 2 years, I was an underperformer. In our scale, when we rank people 1 to 5, I was a 4. I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't have a perspective of how it fit in. I got my 2 years. I went out literally the day I got it and recruited on the outside. And the only thing that kept me in the firm at that point in time was the fact that the recruiter, and you will hear many of them and from many of them, because once you've got experience of PwC, every recruiter is going to have your name and they're going to be coming after you, because this profession gives you an unbelievable opportunity to do an unbelievable amount of other things. So the recruiter called me up and says, Bob, I got a great opportunity for you. Come on over. I went over. It was for twice the money, but it was a basic job that would allow me to stay in one place for a long period of time, and the recruiter oversold the job. I decided not to take it. Again, money wasn't everything at that point in time. I stayed with the firm for about 3 years. I went into HR for a year. I went in HR because the firm actually picked you out, and it gave me a totally different side of the business. You got a chance to meet, in my case, 250 people that would come into you and say, I'm interested in doing X, Y, Z, and my job was to play matchmaker. The firm needed people to go work on Chemical Bank, IBM, Pfizer, Disney, whatever the case may be, and over here people would come in and say, I really want to understand the pharmaceutical industry, or I want to work on a big bank, or I want to work at Goldman Sachs, or whatever the case may be, and I played matchmaker, and I needed to understand them. What they wanted to do, why they wanted to do it. And folks, I'll tell you, in HR, you get the best stories. Who's hooking up with who? Who's actually doing what? Why are they quitting? Whatever the case may be. And just to tell you some really funny stories, we had one individual that came in, a woman by the name of Ann Costello. And I love this. I knew Ann. She came in and said, Bob, I'm leaving the firm. I was like, Ann, I'm disappointed, but what are you doing? She goes, I want to do something totally different. I'm going to join the FBI. I was like, okay, great, I get it, I understand, fine. And she goes, do you mind being a reference? And I said, yeah, sure, no problem. So about 2 weeks later, I get a phone call from somebody in the recruiting department of the FBI, and they said, Mr. Moritz, we need to talk to you about Ann. I need about an hour of your time to go through the interview process, yada, yada, yada. They're asking me all these questions. We finally get to the end of the interview, and the guy goes, Mr. Moritz, I have to ask you this one final question. It's required for everybody. Do you think Ann can handle a gun? And I got to say, folks, I turned around and I said, listen, I know she can handle a number 2 pencil and a calculator. I have no idea about the gun, all right? I have no clue. We had another individual that came in and left us. This is a really interesting story about taking risk. He came in and said, Bob, I'm leaving the firm. I said, Jim, I can't believe it. What are you doing? He goes, I actually want to own my own business. I'm going to go into a franchise. I said, that's great. What are you thinking about? He goes, I want to own a Domino's Pizza and actually become the franchise owner. I said, that's great, Jim. How do you do it? He says, well, you got to actually apply, and before you can actually be an owner and a franchise owner, you got to be a manager. Great. What do you got to do to be a manager? Well, to be a manager, you actually have to be an assistant manager for 6 months to prove you can do it. I said, Jim, that's great. What do you got to do that? Well, you got to work the desk for about a month or something like that. I said, Jim, help me understand this. What do you need to do to get to the desk job? He goes, well, yeah, I got to deliver pizzas for about a month or so. I said, Jim, let me get this right. You're going to deliver pizzas for a month or so, then you're going to work the cashier's desk for a month or so, and then you're going to become the assistant manager, and you actually are putting your wife through medical school right now. He goes, yes, but that's what I want to do. Now, we had a blast with this when Jim left. So when we were working really hard late at night, we were calling up, asking for Domino's Pizza because we wanted Jim to deliver. But we never found Jim. We never saw Jim. But the moral of the story with Jim was he took a risk. So 6 years later, somebody actually sends me a cutout of one of the local newspapers. He owns 8 Domino's franchise locations now and is doing unbelievably well. So again, it goes back to this concept from a personal perspective, coming back to you, of being willing to take some risks and do something differently. So that was my year in HR. I then had an opportunity to get asked to go to Japan. This was in the early 90s. I ended up going over there for 3.5 years. Folks, I'm not like you. I wasn't like you at that time. I never had a passport. I never went west of the Mississippi River. So here I am, just about ready to be married, and I'm getting asked to go to Japan. I don't eat sushi. I don't talk Japanese. I have no clue where I'm going. I'm just about ready to get married. We go over and are overwhelmed by Japan and the inability to learn the language and other stuff like that. But man, it gave you a unique perspective to see other cultures. And it wasn't so much about the Japanese. It was much about getting to know people who were there from Germany, there from Singapore, there from France, there from the UK, there from South America, that allowed you to see different perspectives from different points of view from a cultural and a business perspective. And just to digress there, what it taught me was unbelievable amount of thought process around the concept of diversity. Because when I was in Japan, this white guy, I was the minority. I was the one people were talking about in Japanese that I didn't understand what they were saying. I was the one that was discriminated around because I wasn't asked to go to the lunches, or I was the one discriminated against from the taxi driver that wouldn't pick me up, because taxi drivers there know all of the foreigners live close to town and the long fares are the Japanese that live an hour and a half away. So you can stand on the street for an hour and a half trying to get a cab. But that was the reality and a lesson learned that was huge in terms of the concept of diversity and the importance of inclusiveness. Another great story as you think about it. I'm there 6 weeks. I can't speak the language. I'm auditing a bank. There's a loan on the books of the bank. Principal interest hasn't been paid, but it hasn't been written off. And I don't know how many of you are in accounting classes, but normally after a couple of years, when they don't sort of have any payments, you typically write it off with a bad debt allowance or something like that. I go to the Japanese staff working that job. I said, what's up with this? Because my antenna gets raised as an auditor. They say, oh, well, Mr. Such and Such says it's okay. I was like, well, where is Mr. Such and Such? Well, he's on a leave of absence. So my antenna goes up a little higher. So I said, well, let's go talk to the loan officer. Who is it? They say it's a guy by the name of Suzuki-san. So let's go see Suzuki-san. Well, Suzuki-san doesn't speak English. You need to bring a translator. So we go into the meeting, and I start off by asking all kinds of questions as an auditor should. Tell me a little bit about this loan. Tell me why it hasn't been written off. Can you tell me why? And all I know, folks, is I am getting cursed out in Japanese. Because those are the only words that I know at this point in time. We walk out of the meeting, and I say to my translator, what happened? And he goes, oh, Moritz-san, very bad meeting. I say, I got that. Thank you very much. He said, Moritz-san, you need to understand, you're challenging his authority. In Japan, you don't challenge authority. And I looked at him and I said, well, that's my job. He goes, you're challenging authority and you're an American challenging his authority. Even worse. Third strike, you're a young American challenging his authority. You're out. The moral of the story was, how do you think about doing business in a different culture where, in fact, your job, respectfully, is to try to challenge thinking in terms of independently objecting and assessing, are they doing it right and appropriate? The rest of the story, French bank, I go to see the CFO the next day. The CFO and I are talking. I said, oh, yeah, I saw Suzuki-san. I had a really bad meeting. He goes, oh, yeah, Bob, we know. It already got out. I said, yeah, I had a challenging conversation with him. We had to do it with the translator because he doesn't speak English. He stopped me right there and goes, Bob, Suzuki-san speaks perfect English. He just didn't want to speak it to you. But it was a great lesson learned in terms of how do you do business on a global basis. I came back from Japan. I spent a lot of time in the financial services industry. I had a chance to work on JP Morgan. I had a chance to work on all the mergers. I had a chance to work on the New York Stock Exchange doing audits and non-audit work. And that started in, actually, Japan, because I was there serving the broader client base that we had and teaching people that maybe didn't know what was going on in Japan or around the rest of the world. So great opportunity from a Japan perspective to travel around, great opportunity to get a better network. Another lesson learned, your networks are usually important. Don't lose them. Don't forget about them. But when I came back, I now had a network around the world that I can rely on. I knew somebody that was with me in Japan from France. If I needed something in France, I can talk to them. I knew, in fact, somebody in Germany. I knew somebody in Singapore. You had a leverage model that now worked. Another lesson learned, man, your network's important, but they're only as good as the time and energy you put into them. And that's super important in terms of where you're sitting today. And just to give you a more personal story, what I used to do when I graduated college, every year, twice a year, I'd actually arrange a conference call with the people I actually grew up with on campus. And in my school, the particular dorm I was in, it was literally, I was the RA, and there were probably like 20 different guys on the floor. It was alternatives, guys and girls. So we'd do a call with about 20 of us just to stay connected. There was another group I stayed connected with in my accounting class. And there was sort of 5 or 6 of them that, again, once a year, I'd connect the dots with them. And every year thereafter, we have since connected. One of my best friends actually now lives in D.C., works for a communications company. Oh, by the way, he's pitching work for PwC. Oh, by the way, the person I'm now with, long-distance relationship, she and I went to school together, never dated while we were together. And actually, I reconnected with her on one of the trips, bringing these groups together. The people that you're sitting next to right now, left, right, center of you, and back of you, wherever you may work in the future, they may be sitting right across the table. To give you 2 lessons learned on this topic really quickly, how about the person in PwC that somebody leaves his business unit? That person tries calling 5 or 6 times. That person never has time to return the phone call. That same PwC person, who's still with the firm, not the one who left, goes into a client pitch, walks in, turns around, and the client is the same person that he hasn't responded to the 5 or 6 phone calls. And he didn't know he was at that company, nor was going to be part of that pitch. Needless to say, lost the work. Don't know if that was the only reason, but needless to say, it could have been one of the reasons. Give you another storyline. A major, major company where we used to audit, well, still audit today, but used to audit at this particular location. One of our first-year people ended up connecting with the mail guy. Back then, we didn't have emails, same-time messaging, text messaging, or anything else, so you literally got mail from the home office sent by courier down to the location you were at. That mail guy delivered the mail. He connected with one of our first-year people. That mail guy got promoted, ended up running their back office about a decade later. That same person that met him day one stayed connected with him. That same mail guy that now ran the back office ended up running the front office. That same mail guy ended up being the CEO of the company 20-some-odd years later. The relationship, though, that CEO had with that first-year staff accountant stayed all the way throughout. So anytime he needed help or we needed help, that relationship was key. Absolutely key. Because he did something as simple as saying, thank you for the mail, who are you, and striking up a conversation. I'm going to leave you with one other story here on this same topic. How many of you know the name John Major? Show of hands. Anybody? So John Major, maybe the one you're thinking about, used to be the Prime Minister of the UK? Okay, I'm not talking about that one. John Major used to be the doorman at PwC in London. You want to talk about little things having a big, important impact on people? Listen to this story. Client comes in for a pitch. He takes the red eye, lands in London, goes to our office because he's going to see 4 of the firms to hear the pitch for the piece of work that's pretty big. Comes to our office first, shows up at the doorstep. John Major, our door guy, says, what are you doing here? How can I help you? Guy says, just got off the plane. I got about 2 hours to kill. Any place I can take a shower or get a cup of coffee? John Major says, absolutely, I'll take care of you, no problem. We got a shower downstairs in the building, takes him off the building, gets him set up. Guy does his thing, John leaves. What the guy doesn't know is John actually goes out, grabs the guy a cup of coffee and a donut, leaves it there by the locker for him to come out of the shower. When he comes out of the shower, John's there afterwards to say, hey, everything okay? Guy says, yes, thanks very much. I got to make a couple of phone calls. John says, no problem. Let me get you in a room to make a couple of phone calls. John Major basically takes care of the guy for the next 2 hours. Keep in mind, doorman at the front door. The guy's sitting in a room waiting for our people to show up. 3 of our people walk into the room. The guy goes, how you doing? I'm such and such. He goes, can I ask you one question? I said, sure. Does John Major work for you guys? I just met him downstairs. Team goes, yeah, it's been here about 20 years. He goes, we're done. Team looks at him and says, what do you mean? You don't need to pitch, you won the work. You won the work because if John Major is the evidence of your culture and the behaviors that you all have, and that's PwC, I'm going to spend the next hour calling the other 3 competitors and telling them I'm not coming. That piece of work ended up being a $50 million piece of work, folks, because John Major took care of somebody walking in the front door coming off a red-eye flight. That servient mentality that I know is evident in campus around here, hugely impactful, and the little things really matter. And those are some of the lessons learned that equally apply at school as they do in the business community. Jump going forward. 3 more stories for you, then we're going to jump into why you and Q&A. Hugh Jackman, Bill Clinton, as well as George Bush. All 3 of them I've had a chance to meet, connect with, and interview. Now, I stopped there for a reason, and I'll tell you each story about them in a second. But when I was in your shoes, keep in mind, A, I was going for the money. I had no idea what I was going to do in the future, and I very much was 2 years and out. My grades were not great, and I'm sure yours are a heck of a lot better than mine. My first 2 years, I was that underperformer. The underlying message, the world is yours for the taking should you choose to do it. So let's come back to the 3 stories. My mother still tries to figure out, am I doing tax returns every April 15th? The reality is our business is a people business that, yes, gets into number crunching from a tax or an accounting or an auditing perspective, but it's a people business that you have to have relationship skills to get information, to then independently assess whether they're doing right or wrong or appropriate things or giving them advice on best practices. And that doesn't matter if you're an accounting auditor, a tax person, or a consulting. And it doesn't matter if you're working on the audit client, the non-audit client, the government project, or anything else associated with it. So if you think about that for a second, what the heck does Hugh Jackman have to do with this story? We count the Oscars. We've done it for 80 years. We've done that for 80 years, and there's a whole process that, thankfully, knock on wood, we've never messed up. I've had a chance to go to the Oscars. I've had a chance to walk the red carpet. Ladies, I hate to tell you, but every actor is shorter than me, okay? With the exception of Hugh Jackman. And oh, by the way, guys, all the women are far beautiful, more beautiful than they are on television. But it is funny to watch them up close and personal. And have a chance actually to meet Hugh Jackman, walking the red carpet. I will tell you, my daughter was really upset with me that I didn't bring her, and I brought my girlfriend instead, but nonetheless, an unbelievable opportunity that going back to how many years ago when I started that I was upset that I didn't get a chance to sit in the MTV Music Awards, but had a chance later to actually go to the Oscars, walk the red carpet, and connect. Unbelievable. What I didn't realize until I found out at the time I met him, Hugh Jackman's father actually used to work at PwC, was a big partner in the Australian firm. So our conversations ended up being not only about necessarily him actually doing what he does at the Oscars, but more importantly, what his father used to talk about in terms of the connections to us. Second, Bill Clinton. Every year we have an opportunity to bring clients together at various events. Bill Clinton's been a speaker at our events probably 3 or 4 different times. I've had a chance to connect with Clinton, talk with Clinton a bunch of different times in the World Economic Forum. We did a huge piece of work for him when he and actually George Bush and the French government were spending time thinking about all the money that had to go into Haiti and dispersing it post the earthquakes that were down there. And he was the one in Davos, before I even met him, when somebody asked, how's it going down there? He actually went out of his way to say, well, we've got PwC working on this stuff. They're doing a fantastic job in terms of providing the project management and the assurance over the money going into the right places. And at that point in time, I was standing behind him. He didn't know I was next to him. And that was the brand of PwC that now I've got a former president talking about all the wonderful stuff we're doing that brought actually our assurance people and our consulting people together to actually go serve society at large, bringing the skill sets necessary to make it happen. And a great opportunity to then connect with the Clinton Foundation and what they're doing from a CGI perspective in the Global Clinton Initiative. And what we started talking about is what, in fact, does he see as the challenges in society at large? We ended up talking about the fact that we're focused on youth education and financial literacy, and then all of a sudden he asked us to go talk about what we're doing at his last conference a year ago. where we're actually taking all of our people, we've created curriculums for financial literacy to be taught by teachers. Why? 75% of your teachers in K through 12 don't feel like they can actually teach financial literacy skills. When you look at our competencies in financial literacy outside compared to the rest of the countries, we're actually one of the worst countries right now. So we ended up bringing teachers together 3 times a year. Last time we actually did it over a weekend. We had 200 physically there. We had 600 virtually there, where we taught them how to teach. And then we committed our people, the 39,000, to do 1 million hours of time in the classroom to go teach. And we're seeing the impact in terms of the next generation of people when their test scores have improved by 50%. And he all of a sudden is talking about that at his latest conference. Bush, same kind of concept. Opportunity to interview him right at the time when bin Laden was actually killed. Literally the day after. Great insight in terms of him, his role, how he thought about it, the connections to him, et cetera, et cetera. And it didn't matter Republican or Democrat, but it was just a great intellectual conversation. And as a result, a bond formed in terms of what we do now in some of his major charities as he thinks about his legacy and what he's trying to do down in Texas as well as around the rest of the country and where he's spending his time and effort. The reason I tell you those 3 stories, there's no way in the world I would have thought about them when I first started, that I'd even be capable of doing that kind of stuff. And second, my mother still doesn't know what the heck I do, because if I'm hanging out with those people, she's really confused. The message and the moral of the story, folks, is that you have an unbelievable opportunity in front of you. Like me, I didn't know it at the time. And my thinking has evolved personally to a different place in time in terms of A, what I do, B, what our firm is capable of doing, and C, the kind of things that we get connected to. And if I were to open up the iPad and go to the Wall Street Journal right now, I would tell you with every single one of the articles, probably in the first 10 pages, some way, shape, or form, we are behind every single one of those storylines because of the different things that we do. The second thing for you to think about, this profession, this opportunity, and I'll take it from a PwC perspective, we did a study 6 years ago, which is to demonstrate if you stay with us 6 years compared to 2 years, regardless if you stay or go elsewhere, your promotional opportunity is about 8 times higher if you stay with us compared to once you leave. Your earnings potential over your lifetime, statistically, based upon what we did, is 10 times higher because of the experience you get and the resume enhancement that you get. So when people ask me, is this the place to go, and should I go into finance, or should I go do this, should I go do that, I say this is the place to go regardless of what your end game may be, and you may not even know what the end game is right now, because when I went in, I didn't know it. And I've had 5 serious times where I've thought about leaving the firm. That first one was at a 2-year mark. The second one was when I was in Japan. I was working for Credit Suisse First Boston on a consulting project at the time. They tried to hire me to be their regional controller. I probably would have increased my compensation probably by 100% based upon the job. Why did I turn that one down? I turned it down because I had no sponsor at home to get me home, because I only knew the people in Japan. And what was it going to feel like when I left to go back home when no one would bring me back home or put me in a position to succeed? And one of the major ones that I had was an opportunity when JP Morgan tried to hire me, first as their controller and potentially to be maybe their CFO. And in that case, the CEO made the pitch, the CFO made the pitch, and then the COO made the pitch. And to leave you with a really important story to think about as you think about your career path, this COO actually started in the profession. He was with one of the big 8 years ago. He and I became very close friends, coming back to that concept of relationship and networking opportunities. We had our families together. We had gone out to dinner together, all that kind of stuff. He comes in, he opens the door, says, "Bob, come on in." Closes the door behind me and says, "The CEO asked me to recruit you because he knows I know you really well. Before I do that, I got to ask you a question. Do you want the job? Because if you want the job, I'll help you succeed. But before you decide if you want the job, the question for you is you need to understand the totality of the environment. And I'm here for you as your sponsor. Probably not your mentor, your sponsor, but somebody I really care about personally as well as professionally. And that door is closed for a reason, because this conversation never happened." He said 2 things to me that forever have stuck. "Bob, I've seen your place. I know your profession. It's an unbelievable profession that actually allows people to connect, expand, and leverage the entire organization. And secondly, allow for individual success to happen because there's a whole team of people behind it. That's point number one. If you go to corporate, you will be stuck in corporate at that corporate. You may move to another company, but you are working for that same corporate each and every day. Whereas in your organization, you see a lot of things a lot of different times. Second thing, culture. This is cutthroat. You come in here, you're going to have a target on your back. I just want you to know that. Because a lot of other people will say, why didn't I get that job? He said, I will struggle in terms of inviting 2 people to my kid's wedding that work at this organization that I really call friends. You're going to struggle with who not to invite to your kid's wedding when they're old enough. Because I've seen the bonds between the people that are there and the supportive nature, both professionally and personally. And the moral of the story for me was very important in terms of how do you actually create an environment where for people to succeed. And as I think now about you in this mix, here's our challenge. How do we make sure we create an environment that it is a talent magnet for you to go here compared to Wall Street, compared to Google, compared to Facebook, or every other place that's out there competing for talent, because you are a valued resource that corporates want because you're the future. And they know they need you because of these megatrends where resources are becoming scarce with the right skills in the U.S. So what do we need to do? We need to think about giving you the opportunities to be successful, develop to be leaders, no matter how you want to define it personally, and we need to allow you to grow your own way because it's not a step-by-step, one-size-fits-all mentality. Second, I need to give the next generation of millennials the opportunities to work any place, anytime, anywhere, the way they want to. That's flexibility at its best, allows you to manage work-life flexibility. I need to enable you with technology that you have today personally that is equal in terms of when you walk into a corporate organization. But because of security laws, privacy laws, and everything else, it's hard to do in a corporate. But if I don't have that environment, my environment's not as attractive to you. But what I also ask is that when you come to a place like us, you're very open and transparent around the communication around what you want to do. So it allows us to say, how can I help you achieve that? And that's both professionally and personally. Why do I say that? 6 months ago, walking in to see the CEO of Xerox, a woman by the name of Ursula Burns. The conversation was not about the business. The first 20 minutes was she looked at me, she goes, how do you get the most out of your people to make sure you got the most productivity? And I said, well, we actually think about them as an individual first, trying to deal with everything that's on their agenda, not just the work stuff, but also the personal stuff. She goes, it's really funny you say that, because I just came from a meeting of 6 of my people. And I know for a fact 2 of them had a really bad day because they were moody, grumpy, whatever. And I don't know if it's because it was a bad commute. I don't know if it's because one of their kids ticked them off. I don't know if it's because they got in a fight with their husband or their wife. I have no idea what the reason is. But I am not getting as much productivity and the potential that they have in front of them. And it was really interesting in terms of if you're not thinking about as an organization tying your strategy, coming back to where I started, to the people needs, you will never get to where you want to get to, which is how do I enable your success individually and how do you enable the collective success of an organization? And for us, like I said earlier, we're a people business, professional services business. Our brand is only as good as the individual brands of each and every one of you, the 39,000 of you that hopefully are there, and hopefully X number more when you decide to come into this profession, and hopefully a place like PwC, that's what it's all about. How do you enhance your personal brand? And our job is to do what, in fact, your teachers have done here, and extend the learning, the experience, and give you potential opportunities and exposure to be successful to do whatever it is you want to do. My advice for you is 5-fold. Number 1, think carefully about your personal brand. Think carefully around how are you going to make that impact day one, that same impact that John Major made. That has an impact that's positive on you, but also has a downstream effect paying it forward. Second, ask for feedback. You got to take some risks and ask for the constructive criticism to be better. Myself included in that mix. You got to ask for that feedback to get the feedback and react to it. Third, you got to actually work your networks. They're important. Going back to those stories I tried to tell you about. Fourth, take some risks. Do some things differently outside of your comfort zone. Japan, for me, totally outside of my comfort zone. Outside of my comfort zone, I hated public speaking when I first started in this firm. hated it, didn't like it, and probably wasn't very good at it. Take some risks, put yourself out there, because if you take some risks and you have the right coaching and the right feedback, you will succeed. And last but not least, make sure that you are taking the time to self-reflect in terms of what it is you really want to accomplish, and be vocal about it so you can talk to somebody else who is your sponsor that will help pave the way for you to be successful. I am going to stop here. We've got about 30, 40 minutes or so for questions. Like I said, I am going to answer anything and everything. Politics, economy, profession, personal, does not matter. Fire away, take advantage of the opportunities, and let's get into it. Who wants to start? Is it on? Just tap it on the top and see if it's working. I can hear you. Go ahead.
Thank you very much for coming. My question for you, I guess, you describe yourself a bunch of times as like an underachiever, underperformer. What happened in your life on, small scale, large scale, at PwC, family, whatever, that drove you to be able to challenge the authority of Suzuki San and, meet all these celebrities and where you are today?
I have no idea. Probably three things. As I think around my technical career path, it was in my third year that I got put into a situation where I was front and center. What was always interesting to me that people in this profession get advanced opportunities quicker than people in the comms program or the marketing program or other things like that. So in my third year, I was working at a bank. A trader lost what he said to be $50 million. It turned out to be about $250 million. At the time, they were actually going on a public filing to raise some debt. Partner came in to me and said, you need to figure this out. I'm going to help you figure it out, and you're going to do all the talking to the regulator and to the company. And I could use a few choice words of how I was feeling right then and there, but I won't. But it forced me to get outside of my comfort zone and really be something that I didn't think I was capable of doing, because he forced me into it. Whether or not he knew he was doing that, I have no idea. But what was really interesting is it gave me a chance to understand now the role of what I do, why I do it, and how it connects. So that was point number one. Point number two was that as you think about your own career paths after you leave here, you want to be sought after. You want to be sought after because you're so good at something that other people want you. So I became really good at securitizations back then, because that same year is when I got into the securitization business. It was the first time it started. So the teams around the world at PwC, all of a sudden, because I had some insight knowledge of how that opportunity from a business perspective worked, because I served the client and the company, that people were calling me assuming I was then the resident expert. And by osmosis, by learning, by listening carefully, and by thinking about every opportunity being a learning opportunity, I became that sought-after expert. What I tell people in our organization every day is that I want you so well prepared when you walk into the client that they are dying to hire you. I don't want you to take the job, but I want them to say, man, I love them on my account. I wish I actually go hire them full-time to be part of my team. So that takes some work, right? You got to prep, you got to be smart, you got to read, you got to think about what best practices are, you got to ask the right questions. When you go into that interview to Suzuki-san, you got to know what questions to ask, what not to ask. You got to be able to read the body language. So you got to coach and leverage your team in an apprenticeship model, and that's what our firm's all about. Point number one. Point number two, I will tell you that when you look at, and trust me, I fall off the stage a lot of times. Point number two, I would tell you, there was a big lesson learned in 2001 for me. So anybody remember what happened in sort of 2001, 2002? That might be relevant to this? Anybody? What's that? They were 7 or 8 years old, but you still probably will remember because it's taught in business class. So first off, you had Enron, WorldCom, and the demise of Arthur Andersen. Second thing that happened was actually the World Trade Centers coming down. The WorldCom, Enron, and Andersen meltdown allowed me to sit in front of a lot of Andersen partners that didn't know what was going on and had tears in their eyes because they lost everything. So I now sit in this seat and say, there's no way in the world I'm going to allow that to happen in my firm because of the impact that particular event had on them and what I saw sitting across the table. It's also taught me that I have to be extremely transparent about what's going on each and every day, either for me personally or for the organization. Because their problem at that point in time, they had no idea that place was falling apart other than 5 people knowing it. And in fact, I was telling them more than they knew. That's not great from a corporate entity perspective. Point number 1. Point number 2, World Trade Center. Probably the most difficult issue I ever had to deal with in my entire career. And you're saying to yourself, wow, help me with that one. We're a huge organization. Any given day, we have 250 people in those towers because of the work that we do. Thankfully, that day, we had training sessions going on that most of the people were outside of those buildings. And in fact, I was across the river in New Jersey. Someone ran in, said one of the planes crashed in. We all went outside. I saw the second plane hit the tower. I saw both of them come down. At the time, I was running our financial services practice across the country. Majority of our people in those trade center buildings were financial services people. My mindset immediately goes to all of our people that are there. Thankfully, we had 60 people in the World Trade Center that day. They all got out. We didn't lose anybody. The other side of the equation, we travel around a lot. We had 6 people on the planes that died. For the next 3 or 4 days, we spent an immense amount of time, and we closed the office down. I remember going into the office the next day, working with 4 other people, laying out the plans to make sure we track down each and every one of our people, and then talk to each and every one of our clients. At what point in time, when you don't hear from Susie, Joe, Mohammed, or whoever, that you haven't heard from them, are you going to pick up the phone and call mom and dad and say, I've not heard from your son or daughter, have you? Because I have no idea if they're under the rubble. But that's the reality of when you think about leadership, when you think about some of the stuff that you're taught, a lot of that is not in the textbooks, folks. And that's the osmosis that comes, and you learn each and every day from what you see others do in the environments they're set up for, and you learn, you leverage, you try some things, you fail, you try again, you do better. And that's where I would say my mindset, as I've thought about, it's just a continuous learning mindset, and I have the privilege of sitting in front of a lot of people, and everything they say and do is a learning opportunity for me. I don't know if that helps, but it gives you a perspective. Others? You got one here, and again, guys, I'll fire away, please, on anything.
So you just talked a little bit about your leadership style. How, over your career, has your leadership style developed, and what are some of the key aspects that you utilize on a daily basis to best communicate with your people and, as you said, get the most out of them?
It's a great question. I had the opportunity to be the lead partner on JP Morgan twice. First time was before all the mergers. Second time was right after Jamie Dimon and the Bank One merger happened. The first time I did the job, I spent a tremendous amount of time walking the hallways on the various floors to understand what was going on and being in the flow of information. My team would come in one day and say, Bob, we just found out that you're doing X, Y, and Z. And I would say, I know, because I was walking the floors. The second time I was at JP Morgan, Jamie asked me to go on the account from my predecessor. My predecessor came back and said, they want you on the job. You're running the New York office now. Figure out a way to do both. Run New York and run the JP Morgan account as the lead audit partner. Couldn't do it the same way. So I had to then think about, how do I leverage myself differently? The second time at JP Morgan, I said to the team, I'm going to focus on 10 relationships. Jamie, the CFO, a couple of the key business people, and the board members. You all are going to connect with everybody else. And I'm not going to walk the hallways. You are. Big difference. If you want to have impact, you can have impact on 5 people. If you want to have bigger impact, you need to think about how you take those 5 people and make them leaders, and then actually have impact on 50. And so on, and so on, and so on. So my leadership style of being at the center of everything and trying to be in the know of everything, maybe because of the male ego or whatever, I have no idea, that's shifted. That I don't need to be on the know of everything, and I don't need to allow, quote unquote, my team to come to me after the fact. In fact, it's demoralizing to the team. If they're so excited that they just found out a new fact, and I say, oh yeah, I know. Well, Bob, why didn't you tell me, number one? And number two, loss of excitement for that sense of energy and inspiration to go do it. So figure out how do you leverage yourself differently. So that'd be point number one. Point number two, other than being on stage, am a heck of a lot more of an introvert. I went through a divorce. I never told anybody in the firm until after it was done. No one. And it hit me. I was at a conference. It was one of our diversity conferences, and I finally went public with it, and I actually talked about the challenge of going through it, the marriage counseling associated with it, the idea of trying to get home to take care of the kids, the idea and the concept of being the single dad, the elements of how that's changed my diversity thinking, the element of what kind of environment I want to create in PwC. And I went public with it for the first time. And it hit me, because as I was thinking about, do I say it, don't I say it, because again, I was the introvert, it was just a flip, and sort of, if I'm going to lead and ask other people to sort of share more of themselves, if I ain't doing it, why should I expect them to do it? If you really want to now manage work-life flexibility, you got to say something. So here's a quick story in terms of saying something, not only mine. I got a call one day from somebody that says, hey, can you call up such and such? He worked all night last night to work on a proposal, and he missed his daughter's birthday. And I'm upset by this. I'm upset by this. The team calls me up the next day and says, do me a favor, don't call. Don't call because he never told anybody it was his kid's birthday. Now again, is that the male ego getting in the way, or is that the type A personality getting in the way? I have no idea. But unless you're willing to share what's important to you and therefore put the issue on the table that you want to get out, it's 4 o'clock to go home, to go do whatever you want to do, go exercise, go on a date, go play soccer, whatever the case may be, you got to put yourself out there and talk. And that's why I said in my lessons for all of you, you got to do more of that. And that's me now talking more openly, transparently about everything and anything. So those are two changes as I thought about it. Others? Nobody else? Over here on the left, and then up on the top there. Or my left, your right, sorry.
So when discussing megatrends, you were kind of discussing the rising role and influence of the BRICS countries and the second-generation BRIC countries. With their rise and influence, do you see kind of a diminishing U.S. global role?
So, great question. We do an annual survey of CEOs, probably about 1,400 CEOs around the world. We ask them a series of questions. One of the questions we ask is, where are you investing and where do you want to invest your time, energy, and capital? Consistently, the U.S. continues to be number one or number two. Consistently, no matter what country you're at. The difference from when we did that survey a while ago compared to today is that a while ago, U.S., China were always 1 and 2. And then you had Brazil, India, Germany that were 3, 4, and 5. And then a big gap between the rest of the world. What you have today is everybody's got on the list sort of 40 different countries in terms of where they're going because they're very targeted. So if I look ahead, I don't see a diminished role for the U.S. What I see is an equally important role for the U.S. if they play it right, which is you actually are not the lead dog anymore. You're in a collaborative world now. And that's candidly one of the challenges we have as we think about sort of macroeconomic policy and political policy with China going on. And I think we have to think about differently our relationships personally between what I'll call the NATO countries across Atlantic, where you've got a different mindset and a different shift in terms of economic power that's happening, hence the reason why we're spending a lot of time in Asia as a country, thinking about what's happening in Japan, what's happening down in some of the other countries that are out there. So I don't think it's going to diminish so much that it's not seen as always this juggernaut that it is, because it will be there, but it will require us in the business community, the political community, and the economic community to act differently in terms of how do we play on the world stage where we used to be front and center, everybody relied on us. Not so much anymore. I'll make it more personal now to PwC. 10 years ago, when people wanted resources that knew things, they always came to the U.S. So we were always sending people to other countries. Today, the management team for PwC in Brazil is equally saying, I want people from China to come to Brazil as much as I want people from the U.S. to come to Brazil. And you're seeing a lot more flow between emerging countries going actually south to south, as opposed to then just, North America, elsewhere around the world. Does that help? Okay. Others? Got 2 up in front here, I think.
So thank you, Bob, for the speech. And so you and Sheryl Sandberg had a conversation just a while ago.
Yeah.
Can you talk more about your conversation and maybe some more about the initiatives PwC had put to help your employees lean in? Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's a great story. So let me just level set for a second. We have done some really interesting things from a human capital perspective. When we think about talent management, succession planning, development, that flexible environment that I talked about and other things like that, and obviously a key element is diversity. And over the last 3 years, we've been rated number 1, 2, or 3, and unfortunately you can't win number 1, 2 years in a row by Diversity Inc., which actually rates all corporates out there. So we've gotten a lot of great brand recognition for this. When Sheryl Sandberg went out with her book, Lean In, I actually wrote a blog that basically said, I agree with the book. People have to lean in. It's not just a women thing. It's actually everybody's got to think about how do you lean into opportunities. But it's important for the corporates to give them the balance to actually lean into. And the point is, I've got to actually allow for people to lean in and be successful, but the corporate's got to make it safe to do it. So you have an environment that encourages it. The corporation has got to actually allow people to lean in by giving them the opportunities with great sponsorship that when they lean in, somebody's helping them accomplish it. And I'm looking for the organizations to actually create the programs and the incentives to allow for diversity and diversity of thinking to be embraced by the corporation and, in fact, part of the overall strategies that are there. So I went out with this blog. She called me up a couple of days later. She went on the Jon Stewart show. She went to a book tour, and then she kept talking about how PwC has done wonderful things in this space because I spent about an hour with her on the phone talking about all the things that we're doing from a corporate perspective. So that led to then us doing this interview with her actually on their campus out there. We spent an hour on the campus talking about her book. I was trying to get into more personal stuff with her. I will tell you she's somewhat very scripted and political in terms of standard answers coming off of the book tour. It's great to meet her. I'd met her a couple of times in Davos before, but from afar. And a light touch. And the conversation was very much about how do we collectively, the individuals and the corporates, help people lean in. So now coming to your second part of the question, we set it up where people can lean into opportunities and we give them sponsors because everybody gets a sponsor and a mentor. And mentors and sponsors are two different things. And I hope, when you get into the corporate world, they are very different. A mentor brings you into the room and says, here's my advice for you, good luck. Go figure it out. A sponsor is somebody who brings you in the room and basically clears the decks and says, let's talk about what you want to accomplish. I agree with you or give you some other things to think about. And in order to get you there positioned, I'm going to get you on the next job. I'm going to get you this promotion. I'm going to put your name in for this. Sometimes you know it. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you don't. And as a result, the concept of sponsorship for us is really important. The other things that we do is we have a lot of conversations with our constituency groups, be it women, minorities, etc., in terms of how is it that you work successfully in organizations, and then also what, in our case, white males can do to be successful. And we call that out very specifically. You're going to get serious about constructive improvement and high performance. You actually got to call out with the idea of constructive criticism. That's what I'm saying, get some feedback. So what we're talking about all the time is how do you create the environment for flexibility so you can deal with work-life balance? How do you create the environment for personal success? And we have this concept called Grow Your Own Way. And we have another concept called PwC Professionals, which gets leadership capabilities into their hands so you can be successful. So there's various programs to help you do those kind of things. So I hit on a couple of them. There's a lot more. They're on the website, and we can get into a lot of other things as well. There was another question here, and then another one up front.
You mentioned the fact about the public accounting world and professional services being a people business. What's been the most important people skill that you've picked up along the way that maybe you didn't have coming right out of college?
Other than my drinking skills when I first started, I would say I go back to the story I told before in terms of opening yourself up a little bit more so. Again, I didn't share a lot. We have 4 basic behaviors that we expect of our people. And it was interesting because they're the same behaviors that John Major showed that enhance a client relationship, but they're the same basic behaviors for our people. So the first one is, do you have a degree of empathy for the person across the table? If you got to deliver a hard message, how do you do it in an empathetic way? As if you were in their shoes and do it in a respectful way. In order to do that, you have to have a relationship. So the second one is relationship skills. If you're not going to have a relationship, it's a flyby, and therefore you can't have a degree of empathy because you know nothing about the person. Third is, what's the value you're bringing? If you're going to then have a personal relationship, the value you're bringing is your perspective to that topic. And the fourth is the concept of teamwork, which is the idea of leveraging your entire team so you personally can be better to deliver that value, or collectively when you're working with somebody else, the teamwork gets you even more value than you have today. Those are the four basic behaviors that we include in the tone at the top, in our evaluation processes, in the examples to sort of change behavior, and all the learning and education courses that we have. My weak spot was this issue of, I got to put a little bit of myself out there if I expect others to do it, and I didn't share as much. So that's the one I would say. If you're going to learn to create trust, well, if you want somebody to trust you and you want to trust them, you've got to know a little bit more about them, so you've got to put yourself out there more so. I think there was another question here in front. Go ahead, I got you. My ears aren't that bad.
My name is John Vernon. I'm from Annapolis, Maryland. Given the recent political climate, how has the government shutdown affected your work at PwC?
Government shutdown. So I did a CNN interview yesterday out of the Chicago office on this topic. So big picture, just to give you some qualifying language and my point of view on this. I don't think, and I see you see it in the paper today, you're going to actually get this country in a position of default, and I do think you'll end up doing something from changing the debt ceiling. I think, unfortunately, the government will kick the can down the road, which is, to me, irresponsible leadership. The government shutdown is a bigger challenge in terms of the implications on the economy, because I think it will be real. But it's only one little piece of what's happened in the government as it tries to manage the budgets. So now to your question, what happened was, well before the government shutdown, there was this concept of sequestering. Well before that, there was actually an edict sent out to the government agencies to cut your spending, which probably started about a year ago as we tried to think about our federal budget. So it's actually the combination of all those things that has actually impacted business, and I'll come back to us, where government organizations started to reduce spending. Some did it in a really good way. They were very targeted. Others did it across the board, which is a stupid way to do it. The sequestering just layered onto that an additional, on a compounded basis, about another 4% cut. Even though the number was 10%, they were already starting to bring it down. And the government shutdown has just taken it to a new extreme. So how has it impacted business? It's definitely impacted the airline and defense industry. It's definitely impacted some elements of the healthcare and education system, because grants and other things like that have been shut down. Research has been shut down. It has definitely impacted, I'll call the retail consumer businesses around D.C., in terms of even the mom and pop shops and stuff like that. For us, we have a decent-sized government business, but the impact has been relatively small. Here's why: because most of the stuff that we've been doing were considered sensitive enough that they actually kept them, because they were that critical to sort of the ongoing mass right now. And in fact, what's happened is the government agencies and the people within them are coming to us to say, can you help us think like a corporate? Because if I got to cut costs by like 10, 15, 20%, which is probably the numbers we really should be talking about, the question is, how do you actually think differently about leverage, effectiveness, and efficiency? So they're coming to us asking for help to think about that stuff, in addition to then providing the support for the program. So there's an upside and a downside that's impacted our business right now. But I see it more as an upside as I look ahead, because I think you're going to have to deal with the big-time change management in terms of how do you manage. And I think the other big upside in that is with the government changes, it's causing CEOs to question, how do I do a business? A lot of uncertainty. So they're questioning, how do they become more effective and efficient and change their business models? That's another opportunity for us. And then it goes to the auditing and the tax stuff. How are we dealing with the tax code changes that's going to fund the government? A lot of time spent there. And how are we thinking about the reporting of the risks and uncertainties that end up in a set of financial statements or an annual report or an analyst report that actually our assurance practice has to be involved with? So that's why, even though, again, look at the first 10 pages of the Wall Street Journal, we're usually behind a lot of that stuff, including some of the stuff that we're working with the government on right now. Other questions? I got one over here.
Hi. Well, you talked a lot about the importance of having personal relationships and building lots of connections, and that's something that really resonates with me. But I was wondering how you allocated the time to maintain those.
So this wonderful little device has helped me tremendously. as does the iPad or any other electronic device. So what do I do in any given day? Train right in, you're usually sort of perusing the news feeds to stay current. I may be same timing somebody in terms of just checking in back to the relationship concept. I definitely am using same time, video conferencing, emails, just to get a pulse of the organization. So while I have my direct leadership team, I also end up singing a bunch of one-liners like what's happening, what are people thinking to those trusted relationships I have, just so I have a sense and a pulse of what's going on. You then end up spending a lot of time connecting with politicians, regulators, corporates, and leveraging technology to collaborate real-time basis. In addition to then the personal one-on-one in the meetings, the lunches, the dinners, whatever it may be. And then the same thing happens when you're using Viber to go connect with my daughter overseas. So the reality is you've got to make the investments to do it, and my thing is twofold. One is every single day, learning experience, reach out experience, connect with the relationships, look through the Rolodex. Who haven't you talked to in 3 months? Pick up the phone and make a phone call or shoot out a quick text message and say what's going on, just to know you're there. Second thing I'll tell you, you didn't ask it, but it's really important. You need time to get away to make sure you take care of yourself personally. We have this concept in our firm, it's all about investing in yourself. So the thing we did a couple of years ago was when I talked about different people strategies and what we're doing around our talent. A couple of years ago, when we talked about what is it that people need, we said, okay, give them an opportunity to learn and actually get them away. So when you get promoted from a third year to a fourth year, you now go away for a week. And it's all about nothing to do with technical, nothing to do with the work stuff. It's how do you manage stress, how to manage your time, how did you manage your health, how do you manage your mental well-being for a week on the West Coast to make them a better whole person. And included in that is the how do you manage your time and the stress management and the project management to actually allow that to happen, and with a very tailored assessment of how do you like to operate, how do you want to operate, and what behavioral changes you want to make sure you get that balance right in terms of the personal relationships, the work stuff, and everything else going on right now. So I sort of mix and match it quite a bit, but also take a lot of time off too, because you need time to rethink and recharge the batteries as well. I got time for maybe 2 more questions before walking out of here, guys. Over here.
Hi. So with the passage of the Dodd-Frank Act and Sarbanes-Oxley before it, would you say that complying with those regulations has caused PwC's profit margins to shrink? And if so, what are you doing to address that?
Actually, what people need to understand is any change brought on by regulation or otherwise is an opportunity for us, because every organization doesn't know how to deal with it. Second point, though, is if you look at Sarbanes, a lot of uncertainty on how to deal with it, a lot of additional work that had to be done over time. Once people get it done to comply with the laws and regulations, then they expect you to be effective and efficient, so your margins decrease if you're not changing your business to actually go serve that. So net, what I would tell you is changing tax law, changing regulation, changing accounting standards, changing auditing standards is an opportunity. But if you're not cost competitive, you miss the boat. So let me be very clear about one example. You might have heard, as you read in the papers, all the work that had to be done by the banks to prove that the mortgage business that they had were not detrimental to the homeowners that changed their mortgages over time. Many of them went out and hired consultants to go back and do mortgage look-back work. It's what they call it. You literally had to look at every mortgage file and prove there was no damage to the consumer when they actually went for the mortgage, refinanced or otherwise. Tremendous, tremendous piece of work for the professional services firms that then helps those banks do it. We spent a lot of time with the government saying, you guys have misscoped this work. Why did we do that? Because it was a big revenue opportunity. We did that because we thought it was stupid, it was wasting taxpayers' dollars. As well as we knew 3 years from now, when someone says the amount of money that was paid by those banks to the consultants and the lawyers and everybody else, GAO is going to get all over it, and all of a sudden we're the bad person because we made money on a new requirement for them. So we literally went to some of the regulatory bodies, we went to the people on the Hill and said, the way you've asked these banks to do this work, and I know the political pressures that are there, but you could change the scope of the work, you could probably reduce the amount of work that needed to be done so the banks will pay less. Oh, by the way, some of those banks still have government money, taxpayer money to go do it, and that ends up reducing our revenue and our profitability and margin. But it's the right thing to do. So as you think about us and sort of the world order that we're living in, you got to be really smart about what you choose to take on and the kind of work that it is. But there's tons of opportunities with those megatrends and changing rules, requirements, and regulation. But if you're not thinking about society at large, your brand is going to get negatively impacted. And that's, in fact, what has started to happen when, Elizabeth Warren and others have taken on, why are the banks using the consulting firms? And are they working for the public or are they working for the banks right now? And in that case, we were actually working for the public indirectly, but the banks were paying us, and now you get into an interesting debate around conflict of interest in terms of who pays and who doesn't, which goes back to an interesting conversation around who pays for the audits going forward as well. One more question. Right up there in the center.
Hi. My question is, through the eyes of a recruiter or someone who didn't go to Notre Dame, is there anything special about Notre Dame students? I mean, why you recruit here, or is it just because we're a competitive school? Or is there anything we can bring up in interviews
So let me just so you understand, in today's day and age with those mega trends, and let's go back to that last one being technology and information, you can slice and dice data any way you want to get a predictive analysis of, in this case, the success of the recruits that you bring in from which school you go to. So we do that slicing and dicing of data. This school is unbelievable in terms of the talent that it gives us and the success that you have when you join us. Hence the reason we're here as much as we are, hence the reason I'm here today, and hence the reason this team is here all the time. That's the special sauce that we look for in terms of not only the technical skills, but the soft skills of what you learn while you're on campus that give you that slight but albeit important competitive edge against others right now. And Joe, I don't know if you want to add anything else to the mix, but no, I guess he's cutting me off because I'm actually at the time we got to cut this off. But that's why we're here. That's why we spend as much time and energy as we do with you guys, trying to, A, get you understanding as best we can the opportunity from a place like this. And second, make sure you understand the environment you're walking into that's got huge potential. And last but not least, understanding the skills that you have gotten, that get you here today, are going to be the same kind of skills. But as I say it, I'm interested in sort of the 50-year career path. I want to get you from 21 and think about you all the way to 71. And then typically it's when retirement and age and all that kind of stuff kicks in. I want to think about how do we extend you from when you get here at 18. Your faculty have you for those 4 years. I'm hoping we got you for the next 50. So with that, folks, I'm done for the day. Thanks very much for joining us. Take care.